Just when you thought 2020 couldn't be any more bizarre, he comes along. Now from the man cave in Mountain View, California, it's Nick Pinkerton with the Twisted Wrister Podcast.
Hey, howdy, hey there, Twisters. Hope everything's good with you. I am making this podcast here on July 5th, 2020, one of the most bizarre years in modern history. So, first thing I want to start talking about is 4th of July in Canada Day. So I hope that everybody had a very festive time here on this lovely continent of ours. I didn't really do a ton. I mean, God, what can you do these days anyway? But I was able to go to the grocery store, pick up many tasty adult beverages, pick up some wild boar and some ground venison, and have a nice little cookout with some friends. Must say it was very tasty. Yeah, I had hot dogs there too, but we're a little bit more adventurous in our tastes, at least this time around. Venison is quite good for those of you who aren't familiar with it. It's kind of a leaner, well, I don't know what I could exactly compare it to. It feels natural, that's for sure. It tastes very natural, and it's something that I wish we would consider, adding to our diet or incorporating in our diet a little bit more often. That's actually what I feed Cortana. That's why she's such a strong, healthy pup, even though she's 6.5 years old. Anyway, getting away from that, but yeah, the rest of the day was fine. The evening was going all right until, oh boy, maybe about 9:30 or 10, because not only were fireworks going off then, but they continued past midnight, 12:30, and I've never heard anything like that in my quiet, suburban neighborhood here in Mountain View, California. And I know, I could be framed as a Karen for saying this, but man, it's just like, when people are trying to sleep at midnight, come on, have some common sense, especially if these people lighting off M80s or whatever the hell they were setting off last night. So I am definitely tired whilst recording this, but nonetheless, I wanted to put together another podcast. It's been over a month. Got good reception on the first one. We'll see what happens, going forward. But if you are just joining us for the first time, welcome aboard. Hit the red subscribe button on YouTube and the notifications bell. That's when I'm going to be putting out other content out there. Now, a lot of our viewers will know that one of the things that's really been occupying my time versus just making content on YouTube is a series of East Coast Hockey League, or ECHL, jersey concepts that I've been producing. So there's this software, or this download off a company called Sports Templates, and it's a Photoshop file, so you can go into that and put together your own jersey concepts. It's an Adidas template, but of course I decided to use that template for the ECHL. I'm going to be making a video in which I kind of share my process, my thought process behind each of those 26 designs right there. And man, I mean, I've seen people, design full suites of jerseys, uniforms and whatnot, be featured on Post to Post. So I thought to myself, yeah, what if I could take a crack at that, do things a little differently, choose a different league. That way I think I could get away with more just ridiculous designs without, people bitching and complaining in the comments. So I figured, yeah, I'll take a crack at it. And I believe we're going to have somebody feature that on his channel, in which he's doing reactions and rankings. I'm looking forward to that very much. But yeah, I want to put together a video on my own that kind of explains that. Hey, why don't I go ahead and give you a little preview clip of what I've already recorded for my voiceover. Next up, and this is one of my favorites, the Cincinnati Cyclones. So the Cyclones played in the ECHL in the 90s, and their jerseys were very similar to what Calgary used to wear in the mid-90s with, what Shannon calls the Germany jersey. So I wanted to bring some of those angular elements back in and use a yellow design, primarily yellow, because not too many jerseys in hockey are yellow. And, I think that if you put enough color to kind of complement that, then, you can get a jersey that isn't too much of an eyesore. Now with this logo here, this is interesting because I took the original logo, and then behind that is, a main component to the current Cincinnati Cyclones logo. And then I put the current Cyclone C on the shoulders there. And yeah, overall, I really like how this turned out. You got the Cyclones in the neck there too. This is something that looks like it's, worn by a comic book hero or a comic book villain. And frankly, I think this would look fantastic in real life. But yeah, just my opinion there. So you have that right there. A little bit into my mind, if you will. So hope that that can come out pretty soon here, because who knows, maybe I got to start, working on AHL concepts as well. I had a lot of fun with it, but man, when you're producing 26 concepts in a 2-week period, I believe, and you're spending about 2.5 hours on each concept, I mean, that chews into a lot, right? I have a job, and fortunately, it's pretty flexible. But yeah, I was, with about 6 or 7 of those concepts remaining, I was just like, yeah, I gotta get this done, because I'm getting a little exhausted, a little fatigued in on the creativity front. Anyway, look out for that in the near future, and I hope that this can continue as well. In addition to my live streams, so I'm still doing my live streams on Wednesdays, and pretty much the usual suspects have been there every time, and it's been absolutely fantastic. Getting to know folks through the stream, obviously through the comment section, and also on social media. If you haven't already, if you have Twitter or Instagram, find me there. All right, so a couple of topics for today. This was a great comment off the last podcast. Somebody requested that I talk about the best and worst experiences as a sports fan. So I'm not entirely sure how to interpret that, but I have an idea for what I want to talk about. I've already created a video on the 10 best sporting moments I've seen in person. And I've been to some amazing, meaningful games, meaningful moments, and that sort of thing. So it's a good video, and I hope that I can make something like that again, a few years down the road when I go to more playoff games, when I go to more arenas and venues. So yeah, but I wanted to take this in the direction of just like in general, when you go to a sporting event, what's something that happens there that just really grinds your gears? Or what's something that happens at a sporting event that maybe doesn't get talked about as much that really contributes to, your positive experience on things? So I'll go ahead and start on with that in mind, because I do have a couple fun ideas to talk about regarding, bad sports experiences. But on the good side of things, well, I think it's great when, you're going to your first game of the season and you see a mass of people, wearing the team's gear, the team's logo and colors and whatnot. I think that's one of the best feelings across sports when you go to your first game of that year, especially if you go to like opening day or really early in the season. It's almost like, of course you don't know these people by name, but now you've just got thousands of folks who are accepted automatically into your sense of a community for yourself, your circle essentially. So I sometimes joke when somebody says, hey, what are you doing tonight? I'll be like, well, I got to go to church. And they're like, huh? And I'm like, yeah, church starts at 7:30 and it's going to be about a 2.5 hour sermon. And the people are like, wait, but you don't really, and I'm like, yeah, no, I'm just talking about going to a Sharks game. They're like, oh, okay. So yeah, definitely when you go to your first game and see everybody around, and of course, hearing the familiar sounds, that's certainly up there for me. Another thing that I've come to appreciate is when I have an opportunity to, if I need to order some food or drink, to find the right time to actually do that. Being able to strategize. I like to get up to go to the restroom or get food maybe about 4 minutes before the period ends, because in that way you have it where when people don't get back to their seats after intermission in time, then there's still going to be lines and crowds and whatnot outside the seats. So if you do it a few minutes before the intermission, that I think is the right window to do it. You don't have to wait in line at all sometimes. Restrooms, you can make sure that you pick whatever's clean and comfortable for you, and yeah, that's a good feeling when you get that right. When you're like, yeah, I know that we're not on a power play right now, so I might as well just take a trip to the Whiz Palace, if you will. So that's kind of something understated. I wouldn't necessarily say that, but when you go to as many games as I do, then yeah, those sorts of little things definitely matter. And you could say the same thing with queues for security as well. When you find the right exact time to get to the arena so you don't have to wait in line too much to actually get through the doors. Those are a couple of my favorite moments right there. And I could talk about specific hockey moments that I really like as well. If you're seated in the lower bowl or close to the glass, when you see that actual impact into the glass, oh man, that's a heartbeat right there. It's the pulse of the game, I guess. There are still a lot of us out there who like to watch fights, and I mean, I I obviously would, advocate for players being safer, but, hockey, there are so many ways to not be safe. So I'm not going to go down that rabbit hole so much. One thing that really matters to me now when I go to a lot of hockey games in this case, but it would be true for other sports, is I love when you're around people that are obviously aware of, the fan etiquette and the etiquette of, customers or guests who go into the arena. So I picked my seats last year to be in the center of the row instead of at the end of it. The end of it's nice because you can just jump right up to use the bathroom, whatever. But what I found out was that there were people just always cutting in front of me and behind me. So I guess I am transitioning into, shitty moments when you go to sporting events. So, it's not that, look, I'm still fairly young, so I can get up easily, and, I don't have a bunch of nachos on my lap or anything like that usually. So I'm fine with that, right? But there's a time and place for it. And people don't understand. I think it's pretty universal in NHL games, but it's kosher to go across into your seats when the whistle has blown and there's nothing going on. So players are, huddling up and, waiting around for the formation into the face-off circle. So that's the time to do it. But, for various reasons, you could have individuals who can't, get across the row in time. So what I did was I picked my seats to be right in the middle. So then that way, I'll have to get up once or twice. I'll pick my spots for that. And it's cool because I can actually choose to go to one side or the other. So then that way I only, have to, one group of people has to stand up to make way for me. And then I, reverse that the next time. So, but you have folks who will be, the play will have been going on for 15 seconds and then people will be crossing in front of you. And unfortunately, when I first started my half-season plan, you had people doing that in the middle of play too. So that just drove me bonkers. Absolutely. So, so that's something I can plan ahead for fairly well. One thing that you can't plan for fairly well is who's sitting around you. Like if you're going, if you're on a trip somewhere and you want to go to a sporting event, you don't know who's going to be around you. Oh boy, it can be a bit of a mixed bag, I mean, it's one thing, not everybody's going to go to a half season. Not everybody's going to go to 3 or 4 or even 1 sporting event a year. So there are folks out there who don't really understand what's to be expected of the guests. And of course, you don't want to be like, if you're an usher or, event staff or whatever, you don't want to be bossing people around all the time saying like, lean back, please sit back in your seat, please. Keep your stuff out of the aisles, please. So in that case, the fans almost have to sort of police that themselves. And to my understanding, it's quite different if you go to one arena versus another, because in this, at least in the States, the etiquette at sporting events is very different across, I believe, fan bases of individual teams and also geographical regions. There's one way to tell someone to sit down in their seat during play. If you're in New Jersey versus California versus Texas or whatever. And it sucks as a fan, especially as a regular. It's one thing if I'm going somewhere for the first time. If I piss someone off because they don't think that it's actually expected for fans to sit back in their seats and just leaning forward, then it's like, look, I can say it one time, and if the person has a problem with it, well, guess what? I don't have to see that person again. Whereas with the Sharks games, it's not even so much that I wanted to, or that I wanted to avoid being disliked by, folks who clearly didn't know how to, respect the fan etiquette or whatever. It's more that I didn't want the other season ticket holders or half season ticket holders around me to think of, oh, this is the guy who has a problem with everything and with everyone. I didn't want to be that guy. So I just had to kind of grin and bear it, and just kind of expect that people are gonna, they're not going to be aware of everything that they should abide by, and that's something that I wish was more. I wish that was communicated better by the actual event staff. The thing is that even if something's on the jumbotron, it's like, oh yeah, please don't get out of your seat until stoppage and play. Please don't lean forward. Like that stuff is technically communicated on the jumbotron, but it's just really passive in its nature. At least where I am at the Shark Tank. I remember this one Blues fan in the playoffs game. I mean, it could have been a fan of any team. It could have been a fan of my team, right? Well, anyway, he was like so disgusted that people had asked him not to lean forward in his seat, that he just, I mean, yeah, he had a few, and he just went on this rant for like half of a period, and it took forever for the ushers or the event staff to like say, hey, is there a problem? What can we do to make your experience a smoother one and, ensure that for everybody else around you? So it is a little bit of a Wild West in that sense. Anyway, it's something that I really learned from after my first year as a half-season ticket holder. And next year, the following year, when I went to renew that, I told my ticket representative, and she's amazing and accommodating for all this. I said, okay, well, I think what's most important for me, it's not about how close I am to, it's not about, the exact angle that I have necessarily. For me, I just want to make sure that nobody's walking in front of me during play. And I want to make sure that I'm around season ticket holders, so then that way I'm with people who understand and, follow the rules respectively. That's fortunately what happened this last year, and I had no issues like that whatsoever. So I'm very appreciative of that. So just a couple of words of advice. And if you yourself are not familiar with the rules and etiquette, that's totally fine. But it helps if you kind of read up on that stuff before you actually go, because, I'm doubting that these venues can actually do a consistent job of enforcing that. Just my opinion, and please, if you have any stories about this stuff, let me know in the comments below. I'm just glad that I'm not tapping on people's shoulder in front of me who are either drunk or who are a small child. Just said really gently, hey, could you please sit down? And then his mom gave me a dirty look, and I'm like, come on, man. I don't get into this for free. It's like, we all pay for this. We try to be as reasonable as we can with each other. And one topic that I'd like to explore even further would be sports fan etiquette and traditions, fan traditions. So you might go to one arena and people say, well, why the hell did they say that? Why the heck would they do this? And I would really like to explore that more. Because with the Sharks, we have, I think our biggest tradition or kind of outrageous thing, even though there aren't that many real traditions, is that before somebody starts singing the national anthem, the tradition is that it used to be just one person who was actually a season ticket holder, but a Blackhawks fan, oddly enough. You yell at the top of your lungs. You say, hey, followed by the name of the team that you're playing against. Hey, Vancouver. Hey, Nashville. Hey, Buffalo, or something like that. I don't know why. I just randomly picked those teams. So you usually get you'll have a handful of people, scream that. And then the arena, everybody, it almost sounds like everybody, but it's not. It's a lot of people. But they yell, you suck. So that's been going on. I don't know if it happened during the days of the Cow Palace, but that's been going on, I think, pretty much the franchise's whole history. So it's a long tradition. It's consistent. It doesn't matter if, the Canadian anthem is going to be played first. It doesn't matter if it's a kid who's going to sing the national anthem. And the anthem singers themselves are instructed to, you hold up the microphone like you're getting ready to sing, but you just wait until the fans say you suck. So, of course, it's not directed at the anthem singer, and the Sharks do overall a really good job of picking anthem singers. I always like when you really vary it too. You have various choirs from the military or from different schools or ethnic groups, and so that's always kind of a treat almost. It's just a little bit of it's like sprinkles on a cupcake, right? It's not going to make or break your experience necessarily, but it's a good touch. Anyway, so I'd like to dive more into those traditions like the Preds and all those "you suck" chants after a goal, and I've been there to experience that myself, and it was fun. There's nothing hostile about that whatsoever. The goalie taunting can be a little bit, but I've done it before too. So anyway, there was also a question from a viewer. If I could bring back one NHL team, a defunct NHL team, which one would I bring back? So I'm going to focus on defunct teams, not defunct franchises. So for example, the Nordiques would be possible because they are possible because even though Colorado is the former Nordiques, there's no team in Quebec. So first of all, let's talk about it from a business standpoint. What franchise that used to exist would bring in the most revenue for the league? Which one do I think? You got to think, if you're all of a sudden putting a team somewhere, how is that affected by teams that are also in that area? Okay. So when I think of, for example, would I put the Montreal Maroons back in the NHL? Probably not, because, Quebec is loyal to the Habs. Same reason why I probably, from a business standpoint, wouldn't put the Nordiques in. Besides, the Nordiques have a really small market. It's what, about the same size as Winnipeg's, if not smaller. So that wouldn't really make sense as well. Hamilton would actually be a good choice. I think Hamilton is far enough away from Toronto, and you have Hamilton is a CFL team as well. So, they're used to having a rivalry with Toronto. So I would consider it. I would consider Hamilton. I think that's a good one. It's a big enough city. I don't know if you would get much more support from beyond that, but I think that would be possible. So the Hamilton Tigers. Plus, there aren't any Tigers in the NHL. So that wouldn't be so bad, would it now? I could theoretically, let's see who else would be in a part of that list, right? Atlanta, right? Atlanta would be a good argument. It's got other sports teams, but that's maybe something that actually shoots it down. Because Atlanta isn't a traditional hockey market. It had 2 NHL teams, both of whom failed there. I probably wouldn't want to put a team back there. The Oakland Seals, that would actually be a good argument from a business perspective as well. Even though the Sharks are, 45 minutes away, more or less, really, Oakland for sports is kind of its own thing. Oakland loves the Warriors and had loved the Raiders and the A's. But Oakland doesn't love the San Francisco Giants or the 49ers or the Sharks even, really. It's kind of interesting. The Sharks stay south in San Jose in terms of fan base, really. Not that there aren't people in Oakland who like the Sharks. So, yeah, that would be a possibility. It'd be interesting because you can have 2 Bay Area teams. It hasn't always been successful, but you can. I think of the 49ers and the Raiders versus the Giants and the A's. So it could happen. That wouldn't be so bad. And, the Bay Area is large enough for that. So possible. The Cleveland Barons even. Cleveland is a fantastic sports town. It already has, even though it's not that big, at least the city of Cleveland itself isn't. Yeah, you have the Cavs and the Browns and the Indians. It's kind of like Pittsburgh. You put a professional sports team there and that team is going to be a part of the city's identity. So I think Cleveland, compared to the Bay Area, I would actually see Cleveland as more beneficial. The Blue Jackets have found success in Ohio. The Barons, in this case, would have a great rivalry with Pittsburgh nearby. Probably a great rivalry with Detroit. So I'm kind of liking them as well. Another area that I wanted to bring up was Kansas City. So that's where the Scouts played, I think, just for 2 or 3 years. And Kansas City is a good sports market as well. We just saw, with the Chiefs winning the Super Bowl, with Sporting KC in Major League Soccer winning a title, with the Royals winning a title. It's a solid sports market there. I don't know exactly how crazy they are for the Blues or for other hockey teams there. So I think between that and Cleveland, those would be really good markets. For business. I'm trying to think of what other former teams I could consider, right? So actually, you know what? A good website to go to for that is NHLuniforms.com. So we already talked about Atlanta, Oakland, we discussed them, Cleveland, Colorado for the Rockies, but the Avs control that territory now very comfortably. Hartford, put another team back in Hartford. I don't know. My knowledge of sports fan bases on the East Coast is really not all that great. But to me, the Whalers have probably been away from there long enough to where any hockey fans there are probably going to root for other teams that didn't have intense rivalries with Hartford in the first place. So I could see them rooting for, the Rangers. I don't know about the Bruins as much, but I don't think too many people in Hartford are fans of the Hurricanes. So you could theoretically kind of turn them back on to NHL as well. But you do still have a fairly small market versus a place like Kansas City or even Cleveland, I think. I already talked about the Maroons and the Wanderers. I guess that was probably the other team I brought up there. New York Americans, I think New York has more than enough teams, right? The Philadelphia Quakers, Philly's one of the best franchises when it comes to consistently drawing fans. There's also the Pittsburgh Pirates. That would never happen. Quebec Bulldogs, I already talked about the Nordiques. St. Louis Eagles, obviously the Blues are doing quite well for themselves there. And you have the original Winnipeg Jets as well. So between Cleveland and Kansas City, I would say. And boy, between those two, which one would I think fare better? Well, Kansas City, you would have a rivalry with St. Louis, and you could say you'd have a rivalry with Colorado and Dallas as well. But with Cleveland, when you form natural rivalries with, I would think Chicago, perhaps, if they were still in the Western Conference. I was just thinking about basketball, during the Jordan era. You have Detroit there as well, which is close by. Pittsburgh, that's terrific rivalry-wise. Even, Nashville's probably a few hours away, but I don't know. Cleveland, to me, would probably be my front runner. That's going to be my pick. But yeah, you guys obviously let me know if you're listening this deep into the podcast. Chime into the comments there. Now, what about culturally? What team would I bring back from a cultural standpoint for the marketability of the NHL? And Quebec would certainly be up there, if not at the top, because the Nordiques are classic and celebrated by hockey fans who didn't even live anywhere near there. We always talk about how we want the Nordiques back, how we love their jerseys, especially myself. The lore of the Nordiques isn't really that extensive, but when you can talk about how at one point they fielded a team that had, Joe Sakic, of course, and Peter Forsberg, and Owen Nolan and Mike Ricci. They had some players who went on to have excellent careers. So Quebec has to be right up there. If you had to put a team back in the U.S., the North Stars, would come to mind, but I couldn't see the Twin Cities having two NHL franchises. The North Stars could even drown out the Wild if that were the case. Hartford would be another one in terms of marketability. I mean, come on. The Canes have turned into a very marketable team. You put them back you put the Whalers back where the Canes originated, and people would, I guess, be kind of revived as hockey fans out there for sure. So those would be up there, and of course the other one I would argue is the Atlanta Flames, because Atlanta is the home of two former NHL teams, or even the Thrashers, right? I guess the Thrashers because the Flames are in Calgary. So in terms of marketability, I think the Thrashers good enough, I suppose. I also wanted to discuss an idea that came from a video that the hockey guy put out. So I think it was 2 years ago. He said, okay, if I had to rebuild the NHL, where are the first 6 markets that I'm going to pick? And how would I expand from there? So what I'm going to do is something similar. And I'm going to say, all right, I'm going to rebuild the league kind of in accordance with how it was gradually built. So start with an original 6, but in this case, you can't pick any of the original 6 franchises. So I have to pick other teams there. So I would do that. The next thing I would do is expand it to 12 teams. And then I would kind of pick a few teams here and there and gradually add them in, right? So I'm going to have some fun with this one. I kind of thought about my original 6, but we'll see. So I'm going to choose 6 teams that weren't part of the original 6. I mean, one way to do it is, think about teams that consistently draw well. You can think about teams that have Stanley Cups, teams that have been around the longest and are the most proven. I would start off, in this case, because I can't choose anybody from the original 6, I'm going to pick Pittsburgh. Pittsburgh is a 5-time Stanley Cup champion. They're so marketable. They've, had some of the league's absolute elite players. So they are toward the top of the list in my original 6 teams that I'm going to add. In accordance with that, I can choose either of 2 teams, I believe. I can either choose Philadelphia or I can choose Washington. So you got to love that state rivalry between the 2 teams. But when it comes to Washington, D.C. and what that could bring kind of from a more entertainment side or a tourism side, even though Philadelphia, hey, there are reasons to go over there, not just cheesesteaks, I would probably lean toward the Capitals. So the Capitals will be my second team. Now, in this case, I'm going to try to expand the league a little bit. I'm not going to put it just in one region because that's not as fun. That's more predictable. I could just choose, 6 teams in the Metropolitan Division. I'm not going to do that. So now I want to go other places, obviously, and I think of 2 markets in Canada that aren't from original 6 franchises. So one I'm going to choose is based on the size of its market comparatively versus other Canadian markets, and that is the Vancouver Canucks. So Vancouver is going to get onto my list as well. It's a big metro area, it's a beautiful place, and how could you not have hockey on the other side of Canada? So there's that. Now, you got to pick somebody who Canada can play against as a sort of rival. And in this case, I can pick Winnipeg, I can pick Ottawa technically, I can't pick Seattle yet, not at this point. I got my pick of Calgary, or I could pick Edmonton. Here we have 2 teams in Alberta. Calgary, I think its metro is a little bigger than Edmonton's, not by too much though. Edmonton has more Stanley Cups. Calgary is probably more visited in terms of proximity to Banff and Jasper, as well as the annual rodeo out there. Edmonton, not as much of a destination for that sort of thing. Which one's more marketable, though? You could say Edmonton is more marketable because of their Stanley Cups and, of course, the players that were a part of that. So you could go that route. Or you could go the route of Calgary, which has, I think, a more marketable brand in terms of imagery, iconography. Not to mention it's a little closer to Vancouver, technically. Well, I'm going to start with Calgary in this case. I think Calgary would be an interesting franchise there. So now we got 2 Canadian teams. We've got Pittsburgh and the Capitals. So I need 2 more. So in terms of where I am in the United States, I've got one in the Northwest. I've got another one not very far away from that in the Mountain Time Zone with the Flames. And then I've got the Atlantic region somewhat covered because I've got Pittsburgh and I've got DC. All right, so where are my other 2 teams going to go? What other markets would be good for this kind of thing? Well, I could pick Los Angeles technically because that's a huge sports market. And LA was home to, an NHL team for a long time before they won a Stanley Cup, for a long time before, Wayne Gretzky came aboard and they were able to survive sort of out there. And long enough before the Anaheim Ducks came into the league. So LA is certainly a possibility, but it's not necessarily a hockey town or a hockey market. Not necessarily when you're building from scratch. Whereas if I went to a place like Colorado, there's a little bit more of a hockey feel there. St. Louis, there's a hockey, that's got, players who originated from there, like Ben Bishop. And you could also say the same for Minnesota. However, I could also make an argument that Vegas would be a good spot because the league is already, very interested in, having events there and marketing the Golden Knights. The Golden Knights are one of the most marketable teams in terms of, imagery, iconography, and their sort of narrative, the first couple of years in the NHL. So I'm actually thinking Vegas could be a possibility here. But the thing is that there might be too much distance between Vegas and the closest team to the east of them, or Calgary and the closest team to the east of them with Pittsburgh. So I'm not ready to quite move on those teams yet. I think you got to have somebody in the middle, and I can't have Chicago there. So really my choices are Minnesota, St. Louis, and Colorado. Now, if I'm entering those sports markets with St. Louis, it's pretty good because there's no competition during that time of year for the most part, because the Cardinals would only be playing from April until October. If they were in the postseason, they'd be playing to October or early November. So the heart of the blue season is actually at a good time. Whereas with Minnesota, hockey season it starts when football is still going, and Minnesota sells very well for hockey. But even so, you do have you have the Vikings in this case, and you also have the Timberwolves for basketball. St. Louis is close enough to maybe draw fans from other decent-sized populous regions or metros. So, or I could go with Colorado, which is large enough, close enough to Calgary, not an eternity from Pittsburgh, but I'd have to put one more team in between them. Colorado is, very much Broncos territory as well. So I think St. Louis is a possibility here. I'm going to actually mark them down as my next team. So St. Louis comes next. And it's not an eternity from Calgary necessarily. Then I can pick one other team. So let's see. I would love to pick Buffalo, frankly, because that is home to the best TV ratings in, the United States for hockey. I said Colorado was an option, but I want to say we might need to have one other team in the East. But nonetheless, how could I avoid Los Angeles? I mean, we're talking about a region with, 15 million people. And even though they have 2 football teams, that wouldn't take too much away from actually selling games at the Staples Center. What would take away, though, is the Lakers. Absolutely. Assuming that they're still good. So I don't know if I'm going to bank on LA necessarily. And I talked about Vegas earlier as well. What other markets could I be missing out on? Philadelphia is another one. But again, we want to be able to, create fans in other parts of the country. Buffalo isn't bad. The Islanders would also be a pick here because they are in the largest area in the country. And if you don't have the Rangers there, then they get first dibs. And I don't really see DC or Pittsburgh, people in those areas, otherwise wanting to root for a New York team. So you know what? I'm sorry, Buffalo. I'm going to kick you out in this case. The other team I'm going to put in my original 6, I'm going to do the Islanders. So, bam. All right. What I'm going to do next is I'm going to create my next 6 teams out of expansion. And again, what I'm going to do is I'm not going to pick the original 6 teams. So we're going to still have a challenge here. All right, so who are my next 6 who are not part of the NHL's original 6? We already have a team in New York. That's great. We can't have a team in Chicago. Dallas, that's a big region, and it's a good sports town, but you don't have a traditional hockey market there. Where am I going to go next? You know what? I'm actually going to kind of go off on a limb here. And the next team that I'm going to put in the league, I can't believe I'm doing this. I'm sorry, fellow Sharks fans, but I'm going to Vegas, baby. So Vegas is my first expansion team. Terrific brand, marketability of the city itself. The city can bring in the spectators, people who are just visiting Vegas for the first time, or who go regularly would gladly go there to watch some hockey. It's close enough for people who are in Los Angeles as well. So I think that would be a good spot, definitely. Okay, so that was number 7. Number 8. Well, there's the opportunity of putting a team in Edmonton, but we still have 2 in Western Canada. So where I want to put a team next, I like the possibility of Dallas. It's far enough away from Vegas that it's really its own market at this time. Philadelphia, of course, is going to jump out. You already have Pittsburgh, but I'm sorry, people in Philadelphia do not root for New York or Pittsburgh-based teams. So that is a possibility. Minnesota is still another good possibility too. But I kind of think that there's a little bit of a gap between where the Blues are and where the Penguins are. There almost has to be a team in between there too. But based on the size and the proven nature of the market, the next team I'm actually going to add, I'm going to do this. This is interesting. I'm going to pick Dallas. Dallas is a big market. Once you get past the Cowboys season, it's a good enough market to support a hockey team because the Mavericks are popular, sure, but they're not the Lakers. They're not the Chicago Bulls in their heyday. They're not, that must-have brand out there. Okay, so I've got 8 teams. Now I got to add 4 more. And for this, I'm going to definitely pick something that is more in the Northeast here. We have a team in DC. We have a team in New York. We have a team in Pennsylvania. I can't pick Boston, but I can pick a team like the Devils, the Sabres, the Flyers, so on and so forth. And besides, at this point, I don't have a team that's actually in Toronto. I could technically pick the Senators, but the Senators aren't the most marketable brand right now. And I know that at least in the case of Logan Couture, when it comes to football, he's a big fan of the team from just the other side of Niagara Falls. So the next team I'm going to put on here is the Buffalo Sabres. That is going to be team number 9. So Buffalo is in. Amazing sports market there. Absolutely. Number 10. So the 10th team I want to add here. So I'm looking around my map, and I still see that I haven't put a team in Los Angeles. That would give Vegas an insanely awesome rivalry. I kind of want to put a team there, actually. But will I? Or will I go somewhere else? Will I go to Nashville? Will I go to Columbus? Will I go to Philadelphia? It's just too big to not have a market there. So I'm actually going to go with the Kings next for my next team. So Los Angeles Kings, they are number 10. Now I have 4 teams kind of in the Western U.S. I've got a couple teams in the Central. Not enough, though. But at this point, I cannot deny having a rivalry for Pittsburgh along with DC, and maybe having a rivalry between Philadelphia and, in this case, New York, or Philadelphia and Buffalo. It's really hard for me not to put these guys in any later on, so I'm including Philadelphia. Philadelphia is definitely my next team. So that means we've got one more until we're at expansion. And for that, I think that I'm going to turn to, in this case, I think I'll go with Minnesota. At this point, in the first expansion here, having Minnesota is, I'm like trying to make a map here, and I had Buffalo like way north above Calgary. I don't know why the hell I did that. But yeah, we'll include Minnesota as the 12th team, because Minnesota is a great sports market and obviously is home to a ton of hockey players and hockey programs. So yeah, that would make Vegas, Dallas, Buffalo, Los Angeles, Philadelphia, and Minnesota my 6 expansion teams. All right, so we've got our 12. Now we got some good rivalries set up here. So we've got Vancouver and Calgary. We've got Vegas and LA. We've got Minnesota and St. Louis makes for a good rivalry. We've got Buffalo and the Islanders, so that's pretty good. And then we've got this triangle between Pittsburgh and Philadelphia and the Capitals. So that leaves Dallas without a rival. Now, what would be the closest team for them to play against? I think technically it might be Denver, I think. Or maybe it's about the same distance to St. Louis, but even though Denver is a possibility, we've still kind of left out a little bit of a region in the northern part of the South. So the next team I'm going to bring into the league is the Predators. So then that way we have a nice rivalry between Dallas and Nashville. Okay. Whew. So that was number 13. So we've got rivalries all around. That's fantastic. However, there is most definitely an opportunity to bring on board a franchise that is well respected, or at least for a period of 10 years or so. Even though Calgary and Vancouver at this point have a rivalry, you can't deny that Edmonton needs to be the next team on this list. So Edmonton, welcome to the league right there. Okay, so we're still staying away from the original 6 teams. They're going to come in at the end. Okay, so how many teams do I have left to work with here? So I've picked 14, and I can pick, what would that be, 15 more? Or not 15 more, excuse me, 11 more. Yeah, that would be 25 teams before we get into the original 6. So what I'm going to do for this one is I'm going to give Buffalo a rivalry that's closer than the Islanders. I'm going to give Ottawa the next spot because the nation's capital, close enough to Toronto, you'd have a pretty good sized market right there. So Ottawa is number 15. 16. The Devils are a possibility, But I've got the New York Islanders. I got Philadelphia, which is really close to the Jersey border there. I think next, what I'll do is I'll help bridge a little bit of a gap here. So Vegas has a rivalry with the Kings, and St. Louis has a rivalry with Minnesota. But what about somebody else who, can definitely market itself and has some proven success in the NHL at this current point in time? So the next pick I'm going to make is Colorado. So the Avalanche will be my 16th team to join. So there you go. Colorado will be a nice little connection between Vegas and Calgary. It's close enough to St. Louis. I'd like to introduce them into the league at this point as well. Okay, so who have I left off so far? Oh, I already think I know who's going to come in next here. So we've got Philadelphia. They've been picked. Pittsburgh. So I've got Carolina as a possibility. Columbus, Florida, New Jersey, Winnipeg, Arizona, Anaheim, and San Jose. There's one team I didn't mention already, and they're going to come next because I was thinking, I can't put the Florida Panthers in there because, they have a hard time selling out their games. But there's another team in Florida that doesn't have any problems with that whatsoever, and is home to, I think, about 4 million people. So the next team will be the Tampa Bay Lightning. So 17 is going to be Tampa. Yeah, they have to do some traveling, but hey, they have rivalries with the Preds and Dallas. That's not so bad. Next up, number 18. I have not thought about putting them in here until now, and I think now is a good time. So I'm looking at the metro populations for some of these other regions that are still remaining here. Phoenix is a pretty big place, but Phoenix hasn't yet proven itself to be a good place for a hockey market. Not necessarily. And I like the Coyotes, don't get me wrong, and I have faith in the new ownership. And I'm excited to see the community build around them. So Winnipeg, again, fantastic place, but it's not entirely necessary. It's close enough to Minnesota where people might actually root for them. So I'm not ready to put them in just yet. New Jersey, again, we have a team with the Islanders and the Flyers nearby. So Carolina is another good possibility. But guess what? It's time to put in the San Jose Sharks because that is home to, I believe, about 8 million people in the greater Bay Area or CSA. So number 18 is going to be my San Jose Sharks. So at this point, let's see who we've left out. Who's left to be picked over here? So Carolina, and I might put them in next. Then we've got Columbus, Florida, New Jersey, Anaheim. I haven't picked them yet, in Arizona, and Winnipeg. So I have 7 teams that I can still pick from. So we're trying to fill spots 19 through 25 before we put in the original 6. Right now, I think that, Winnipeg is obviously a very strong market, but it's still pretty small. Florida, now we already have a team in Tampa, so I don't really think we need to totally put a team there. I'm kind of looking at Carolina right now because Carolina has had recent success in terms of drawing fans and is a marketable brand. So the next team I put in is the Carolina Hurricanes at number 19. Now at number 20. So who comes next? Arizona is such a big area, right? It's got tons of people compared to these other regions. Obviously, Anaheim is certainly a possibility, but if you have one good team in Southern California, that can definitely carry the load there. Case in point, the Lakers. Columbus would have a good natural rivalry with Pittsburgh, and not too far away from Nashville. I think we might need to put Columbus in as our next team. Yeah, I'll write them in, and then I'll kind of quickly go through these next few. So I will choose the Coyotes at 21 because it's far enough away from Vegas where I don't really think that, that would really interfere so much. So the Coyotes are at 21. Next up on my list is going to be, I'll put Winnipeg at number 22, excuse me. So small market, but still the fans there are some of the most passionate in the NHL. So they would come in next. So I have Anaheim, the Devils, and Florida to choose from. Well, I'm going to take a shot with... I'll take a shot with Florida first. No, screw that. Check that. I'm gonna put the Ducks next. The Ducks will be the 23rd team added in because Disneyland, amusement parks, conventions. People come to Orange County for so many reasons. So the Ducks would do well over there. Plus the Angels, they have a great fan base. So it's not just Dodgers fans down there. So Anaheim is number 23. And then I have Florida and the Devils to choose from. And it's not to slight Devils fans out there, but at the end of the day, they're just too close to other professional teams. Whereas Miami is still, I think, about 3 or 4 hours away from Tampa. So the Florida Panthers are number 24. And the Devils are number 25. And then you would put, the rest of the original 6 in here. And I don't know if I'll go in order there. But to me, at this point, you already have a team in Ottawa. So do you stick a team in Toronto? You already have a team in Buffalo. Are you going to stick a team in Toronto? Well, the biggest metro area that's been left out so far is New York. But we already have a couple of teams situated in there. So if I'm playing my cards right, I think the next team that comes into the league is actually Chicago because it's a huge area. And we don't have a team there. We don't have a team in Detroit. We don't have a team in Boston. And, of course, Toronto and Montreal. Actually, you know what? I'll put Montreal. I'm sorry. Chicago is not going to be 26. Montreal is number 26. 27 will be Chicago. Then we have Toronto, Boston, New York, and Detroit. New York is obviously the biggest region. They have a couple of teams there. So I'm not ready to move on them just yet. 2 teams in New York certainly works, but not the best. The next place I'm going is, I'm going to choose Boston. Then I'm going to choose Toronto next. So they would move in. Ottawa and Buffalo are the competing teams in that vicinity. But I think that enough people in the Toronto area would have reasons to join, to become allies of the Leafs. Number 30, I will put the Red Wings because Detroit, great sports town. And 31, I'll put the Rangers. And again, not to slight any of these teams. I'm just kind of thinking of how these interesting dynamics would work when you have teams that are close by, even though they didn't come into the NHL until much later. Anyway, that was a fun exercise for me, a little taxing here, but I think that we've reached a good conclusion for this podcast here. Hopefully I can keep doing this. So let me know in the comments below if you have any questions for me or topics you'd like me to talk about, to discuss in my next podcast going forward. So hope that you enjoyed this, and if you did, give it a big thumbs up. Subscribe to the channel if you haven't already, and I'll see you around for a future video or podcast. This is Nick with Twisted Wrister Hockey, signing off.